questions for us, or if you want to hold questions till the end, Assistant CAO Edgar Nolasco is going to present on the San Benito County testing mandate update.
Madam Chair, I had a question.
Yes, Supervisor Hernandez, go ahead.
Thank you. So Ms. White had mentioned, and I was kind of confused because I was reading through the slides, and this is one of the presentations that we got last second, and I saw there was added data that was different than what we initially got. But anyways, she said approval when everything on that language, and I mean looking on the CDC website, it says recommended. So I'm trying to make sure that we're not confusing the public. Are you saying approved to be distributed? Or are we saying legally approved and therefore no longer falls under, or basically is no longer considered experimental, therefore it's no longer under the emergency use authorization, the law?
Hi, yes, thank you. So for both the recent recommendations and decisions regarding booster doses and the coming pediatric, those are still under emergency use authorization as far as it impacts the way we are able to procure and administer those vaccines. The ordering process, approval of ordering process is just in reference to the state system for us to put orders into the system to request vaccine to be delivered to us. But as far as the status of the vaccines themselves, the boosters and what the coming pediatric doses will be under emergency use authorization.
If I could just add to that, Supervisor, just to mention, the emergency use authorization is about finalizing safety. It occurs after all of the safety validity and checks have been completed on a scientific basis. Once that's approved, as we expect now for the pediatric vaccines, it's not really experimental. Experimental suggests that we don't know the outcomes. There are risks that have not been identified. So none of the vaccines that are currently being administered to the public in the US or anticipated for our children in the coming months are experimental once they've completed the combined FDA and CDC review process, which is an evidence-based scientific evaluation of the safety profiles and any risks of new vaccines.
I appreciate that, Doctor. And yeah, it was in a roundabout way, you're basically saying, from what I'm hearing, is hypothetically, once it goes through the process, then it will be no longer experimental. But as of late, it is still considered experimental, right? So we can hypothetical all day long. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying this is really, really important for the public consumption, because they hear approved. They think that means it's no longer experimental. It's super safe. There's no problems with this. And if that was the case, and it's funny because I kind of brought this up earlier, or a prior board meeting where we basically had an issue with basically support, when it comes down to these mandates, and I've argued this, that I know there's liability coming. But my point is there was a mandate that was supposedly going to be presupposed by the federal government under Joe Biden's presidency, where he was going to roll this out. And as of late, we still haven't heard any official declaration, not only of a mandate from the federal level, but ultimately where these vaccines are no longer considered experimental. So all of this is just basically hypothetical. And that's really important, because the main element of the emergency use authorization that's really important is that people have choice, right? Because of that, because of the Nuremberg Code within the EUA, it basically guarantees you don't have to take this if you don't want to. And it's hard to force anybody to do it when considered experimental. But once it gets taken off, then I guess it would be a different situation. But that's not the case today. And I feel like every conversation we've had with the public has been assuming that this is not experimental, and that's just not true.
Supervisor, just to clarify, from a clinical, a public health, a safety point of view, the vaccines that are currently being delivered and have been delivered to the American population, that will be delivered to children in coming months, have passed through that safety review that has been completed, and they, at that point, are not considered experimental. No one uses the term in medicine or public health on these vaccines that they are experimental in nature. They're not experimental. They have proven efficacy and proven safety. The data is absolutely unequivocal, and the evidence is overwhelming that these are safe and effective. So again, from a clinical and public health point of view, these vaccines are not experimental.
Yes. Well, and I don't want to, I respect your opinion, doctor. I'm obviously not a doctor. But if that was 100% true, then these would no longer be under the EUA. That's my main point. If it was that clear, then they would no longer be EUA, but they are. So that changes the dynamic. Again, even for the sake of public transparency and for them to really understand what they're dealing with, that, you know, the EUA still stands under for these vaccines.
And I believe the question has been asked and the question has been answered. Can we move on from that point, Supervisor Hernandez?
Definitely, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm not gonna beat it up anymore. But so I had a question, doctor. So we mentioned the death and the severe, basically the infection rate. I would like to know how many of these cases had underlying health conditions. I don't think we ever hear that, you know, as it pertains to, you know, people being hospitalized or even the death counts. And where are the major breakthrough cases? I know you highlighted there was only 2 that was vaccinated, but I think even just for clarity, that's important information to understand.
The breakthrough cases have been among individuals when it required hospitalization. You're absolutely correct in your intuition that these were individuals who had, in both cases, significant pre-existing morbidity or illness, what we refer to as these prior potentially complicating health conditions. So that is correct perception. Among the breakthrough cases generally, as I mentioned during the presentation, the large majority of these have involved a very what we call a self-limited illness, a mild cold-like illness in which someone who is vaccinated, you know, may have a fever or feel under the weather and fatigued. It's transient, it passes, and they recover typically without needing to go to the hospital at all.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
Yeah, and those are my final questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
To ask from Dr. Gellert and Tracy is that if your PowerPoint presentation can from now on be included in the agenda packet. I understand sometimes you have to have an updated number that comes in the day or so, and so you can always give us an update, but the shell that we received is it doesn't even look like the same PowerPoint that I received this morning at 8 a.m. And so on the line of transparency and deadlines for agenda, I'm going to ask that you really work to get the PowerPoint to us in a timely basis. Please.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can I make a couple comments, and I have a couple questions. First of all, as far as the timeliness, I understand your point, and ideally I agree with you. I know they're trying to get the data as recent as possible.
Right.
So obviously it may not be possible to get it, the current information, you know, a week in advance, obviously, but I understand your point. Just one comment, and then or a couple of comments. First of all, you know, I have to say that it's very frustrating to continue to hear talk about experimental or trying to talk up underlying conditions, all trying to undermine us, what we're really trying to do, which is keep public safe, get as many people vaccinated as possible. These are not experimental vaccines. Dr. Gellert, I think, made that extremely clear. And I think it's a disservice to our county to continue to try to put out misinformation about that kind of a thing. And it undermines what we're trying to do, keep the public safe. As far as underlying conditions, yes, there are underlying conditions. But for every person I've heard that had an underlying condition, I've also heard of people that were young, healthy, and had no underlying condition, and yet they're no longer living because they were not vaccinated. 70 out of 72 people that have died in our county were unvaccinated. And so, sure, some of those people probably did have underlying conditions. But when you have 70 out of 72, that's well over 90%. Clearly, there's no question. If you are vaccinated, you are protecting yourself from hospitalization and death. And we just keep having to remind people of that. Just turning on a couple other things I quickly wanted to mention. When I was looking at the numbers that were presented, although we have done, I think, a great job of making sure that all segments of our community have been vaccinated, and particularly, as was mentioned, the Latino community. I think we've done it's great to see the numbers, but I did make note that of those that are partially vaccinated, there's a higher percentage of the Latino community that remains partially vaccinated. So that continues to be an area that when we're pushing for the partially vaccinated people, that we should particularly look at that when we're looking at outreach. Also, I noticed as far as unvaccinated, for the over 65 age population is, if I recall, it was something like 24%. So some of the people that are most susceptible because of age are some of the, age-wise, unvaccinated. And so that also is an area that we need to particularly target. And then obviously when we're talking about outreach, we need to be particularly mindful of how we're going to get the word out for the 5 to 11 years olds, because that's coming up, as was pointed out, very quickly. And I think that's a critical area for us to address, make sure that those children are vaccinated as quickly as we can. Last comment, with the incentives being projected, vaccine incentives being projected to be exhausted by November 12th, I would like to suggest that we should have on the agenda, on the November 9th agenda, an item so that the board can consider whether we want to continue, the incentives, whether it be the current one or some other incentive. So at least that can be discussed. So I would ask that we get that on the agenda and hopefully get support for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Supervisor Tiffany, if I could just build out on your comments and observations about underlying conditions. I think it's very important for the public to understand that hypertension, high blood pressure, if you're being treated for high blood pressure, that elevates your risk of a severe course with this infection. If you have asthma or other pulmonary illness, if you have any sort of cardiological condition, if you are a cancer patient and receiving immunosuppressive or immunological therapy, that could elevate your risk. So there are very common diabetes puts you at elevated risk of a severe course. These are highly prevalent conditions in our community. I think the US figure is that approximately 65 or 70% of the American population has one chronic condition at least by age 50. And by age 65, that's usually 2 or more chronic conditions. So when we say that there are underlying chronic pre-existing illness in an individual who had a bad course with this infection, we need to understand that there's a very, very large segment of our population and our community as a whole, because unfortunately, chronic diseases are highly prevalent in our community, as the state and the nation as a whole. Just wanted to emphasize that we're not talking about esoteric conditions here. We're talking about things that you'd be hard to find a family where there isn't a member of the family who has one of these conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair,
Hold on, Supervisor Hernandez. Supervisor Kozmicki had a question.
Oh, I have comments,
Sure.
not questions. Is
Okay,
that-
comment, go ahead. It's okay.
Yeah, just as far as the presentation part, I disagree on that. Normally I would agree, if it's a presentation that's not an updated daily sort of situation, but in this case, 2/3 of the presentation are numbers that are, that are fluid, and that, if we get the presentation a week before, then the presentation is utterly pointless. So I just disagree on that. I don't mind if we get like a portion of the presentation. Maybe there's the school part in there. I think that's pretty much the only part that maybe we could have had that a week ago. But if you look through the presentation, the vast majority of it are numbers. And again, they're changing every day. So I appreciate getting a presentation the day of. It makes a lot of sense. The vaccination rate looks good to me from compared with where we were. This is a area where we were pretty far behind the state for a while, and now we're pretty much lined up with the state. So I just really glad to see that we're making progress and want to see us continue that momentum. I appreciate all the staff's work on outreach, and the incentive program to me has been clearly a success as far as getting our numbers bumped up and helping us along the way. I agree about the incentive program. So if needed, I'll be the second person to support putting that on the agenda November 9th. And then the outreach, appreciate the staff's work on outreach. The billboard, something I requested in particular. So thank you. That's coming pretty quick here. And then I agree on the school communities. That really, to me, that is the next phase where we really need to be focused on working with our school partners and making sure that we're all on the same page. All the school districts are on the same page as far as, getting the word out on the importance of the vaccine, putting out, trying to lessen the impact of misinformation and propaganda that's out there. And really just, to me, we really have to have an aggressive effort with our school age children to get them vaccinated, because that otherwise we could find ourselves, remember in, I guess it would have been in the spring, we were down to 0. We all thought we were kind of through this thing. There's ebbs and flows to this whole thing. So it's always possible that we could be, that we could see numbers go up again. And I certainly don't want to see that. As far as school goes, since, there's been a lot of discussion, we had, even today here at the beginning of our meeting about I do want to briefly address the Spring Grove situation. Unfortunate and sad, a young girl collapsed at the school, very serious, was life flighted to Stanford. My thoughts and prayers are with that young girl and her family. That's first and foremost. But with regard to the criticism from the superintendent's husband, and I think that's, something that we should be clear that we're pointing out when we get up and make these public statements, that you're the husband of the person who's really under the microscope here. The public deserves to know that. And as someone who came from a long career in media, I'd like to note the press release from the county on the situation was perfectly appropriate. There were questions about, information, but everything in the press release was accurate. So, it was a very serious situation. Somebody was life flighted from a public place. There's a lot of speculation going around. It's really our role to make sure that we're transparent about these situations, and to let the public know that we as a county do have a role here. There's contact tracing that's involved, for instance, and I appreciate all the work that our public health staff has done in following up with that whole situation and the contact tracing with the outbreak that occurred at the science camp, and then this young girl having an unfortunate medical situation. We didn't release any child's identity. There are no privacy issues here. The county has every right to be involved and concerned due to the implications with wider community health, contact tracing, and the condition of that poor girl. And I had a parent contact me. So the Saturday before this terrible situation occurred at the school, I had a parent contact me very concerned about alarming messaging from the superintendent of that district as far as their approach to our COVID policies and the state's policies. And I've requested that county public health department do a thorough investigation of that messaging from the superintendent principal that was really unfortunate, that talked about Spring Grove in particular, looking at a workaround to the state's COVID policies regarding schools. And I want to make it clear from my perspective as one supervisor, the county will not tolerate rogue school districts defying rules meant to keep the wider community safe and the school community there as safe as possible. Thank you.
Supervisor Hernandez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to apologize to the community for Supervisor Kozmicki's comments. They were out of line. They were completely inaccurate. I mean, it's funny because my question to him, which I don't expect him to answer, I don't want him to answer honestly because it doesn't matter, is did you even talk to the superintendent of the school district? Did you even address the concerns with her if you really cared about this little girl, which is tragedy that this is even becoming publicized? To be clear, the Nixle report said it was a COVID-related emergency. And then our public health officer basically put out that sentiment, all of a sudden takes an interview where he says the child did have COVID, but the cause of a respiratory collapse is still under investigation. So was it COVID-related or was it not? Why would we put out a statement where we're under? So it's creating a lot of presuppositions. The reality is this little girl had nothing to do with the three. There was contract tracing of those three. It was a separate situation. She didn't even test positive till way after, obviously after this emergency. So all of a sudden there was a convoluted, basically reality. Let's put it this way. There's a reason why the PIO position is changing, because that messaging was failure, and it proves that if we're not careful and if the board majority doesn't make a decision about even our messaging, then we could create more damage than we can actually solve, right? You know, the issues that happened. You know, right now we basically have a school district, and for Supervisor Kozmicki to say a rogue district, we have no authority over the school district, zero. To make that statement is fictitious, and by default, it's only intent on creating division. And I'm just calling it as it is. You know, when it comes down to the comment that Supervisor Tiffany had mentioned, there's nothing wrong with telling the truth. Actually, I would think that would be an actual virtue, is to be truthful. What I shared was truthful, and public health literally articulated, yes, you are right, Supervisor Hernandez. So when you're talking about misinformation, Supervisor Tiffany, that's really a big letdown, because you told me in person, Peter, I really want to work with you. That's not someone who wants to work with you. Someone says, we need to, you know, in my home, my son or daughter know that they don't lie to me. And lying isn't just not telling, you know, basically outright lying. It could be not telling me the whole truth. That's what we're doing to the public. We're not telling them the whole truth. And it's been honestly a big disservice to our community because it's only divided us further. So those are my only comments, Madam Chair. I had to answer those.
Supervisor Hernandez, may I just respond to your comment very briefly? I just want to share that the content of the press release was valid. It was factual. The use of the term COVID-related was unfortunate in that it created a misperception. When we said it was, and again, this is our PIO did this. He did this in, desire to move rapidly and communicate with the county residents. The COVID-related is to the fact that there was an outbreak at this school, at the science camp. There were 3 cases, and this child was among them. And so if we had not communicated to our community at large in a transparent manner that this child, very unfortunate, I concur with you, it's tragedy, but if we had not communicated that this was at a school where there was a recent outbreak and that this child was one of the cases in that outbreak, from my point of view, it would have been negligent, public health negligence, because we owe the community all of the facts, and we need to be transparent. So the actual wording is COVID-related, and I clarified this in the interviews I did, 3 media interviews the following days, that only the clinicians at Packard Children's Hospital can identify what the cause of this poor child's collapse was. And then, of course, the parents need to, as her legal guardian, authorize or not the disclosure of that personal health information. But in terms of the communication, I can only imagine that the outrage that would have occurred had we not in the public health let the community at large know that this was at a school where there was a recent outbreak and that this child was involved. That was the underlying intent. The wording could have been crafted better. I grant you that. And I endeavored on my part, at least, to correct that in the subsequent days. And moving forward, I can assure you, I've asked the PIO to share with me all sensitive communications on any outbreak, whether COVID related or not, just to make sure that the precision of the wording could not offer any potential misinterpretation. But certainly, I remain firm in the fact that we did need to share this with the community. Everyone has the right in the community to know that a child collapsed at a school where there was a COVID outbreak in recent weeks. Thank you.
Doctor, I 100% agree and appreciate your earnestness. I definitely don't want to disrespect your position. And I would agree with you that the message probably did need to happen. My biggest point with everything that I said is, if we truly want to be a healthy community, then we need to have better communication. This happened in a way that I think created more damage than it actually solved. I mean, if it needed to happen, I recommend that wherever it's happening, that we don't have public health administrative staff talk to to our superintendent. It should be you, doctor. And I'm not saying that didn't happen, but for what I'm hearing, there was basically broken communication, and the county didn't even reach out to the superintendent until, pretty much the Nixle report had already went out there. So even when it comes to messaging, that's really important, right? Because they did the contract tracing, and you're right, this little girl went to the science camp. My biggest point in mentioning is she was separate from those 3 initial cases where they were already contact traced, and that's why this created so much confusion. So granted, she was there, and maybe they needed to put out a message, but it was just, there was individual pieces that weren't necessarily consistent, and we put it out as if it was, and that's what confused the public. And I think just my biggest point is if we can please work at actually communicating with the individuals that we're talking about, because I don't think it's going to unite us. It's going to divide us when we don't do that. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you. And I think we can agree on that point. We're entering the 3rd year now soon of this pandemic and our management of it. And it's a continuous challenge. And there are always opportunities for imperfect communications, whatever the intent is. So I agree with you that there's a best practice learning here. And I will ensure personally that this kind of imprecise language is not used in the future.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
On that note, we're going to go ahead and go to public comment.
Madam Chair, we just have one more item.
Yes. Edgar was trying to present.
Edgar Nolasco, our deputy CAO, has just a few more things to say. Thanks.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. If CMAT can please share my screen, thank you. Okay, that looks a lot better. Thank you. We're here to give you an update as your board recently, as of August 24th, passed the San Benito County testing policy for all county employees. We wanted to provide you an update of what is going on with our workforce. And these are some numbers we wanted to share with you. We currently, and this number fluctuates, we have 535 employees. That is full-time employees, temp employees, and other employees that are designated under our policy. Out of those 535, 65 of those are subject to the vaccine mandate with CDPH. CDPH passed a vaccine mandate for behavioral health on August 5th. We went ahead and implemented that enforcement. 65 of our employees are mandated. No action of the board. That was done by CDPH. Out of the 535, 446 have self-attested that they are fully vaccinated based on the definition. Out of those 446, 431 have verified their vaccine status using the CDPH vaccine guidance principles. 15 of those employees have yet to produce those records. We're working with those employees. It's a failure of communication sometimes with those employees, and some of those employees have odd schedules where they cannot make it down to administration on a regular business hours. So we're working with some of those employees to meet outside of our normal business hours to verify their vaccine status. 86 employees are currently testing bi-weekly, and many thanks to our Health and Human Services colleagues. They have a testing site over there to test employees that are subject to testing based on their self-attestation form, like RMA employees, behavioral health employees, Health and Human Services employees are testing at Health and Human Services. All other employees are testing here at administration. Some employees are testing in remote locations because of operations, like our roads department. We have testing, we accommodated testing at the site just because it would be operational impossible for them to come in and test here. So we worked out working with Mike Chambliss, we're testing our roads people at the yard. Additionally, our corrections and probation folks are testing at the jail because they run on different schedules for those folks that need to be tested. We, out of all of our population, we are missing 3 self-attestation forms. We're working with those employees and those individuals to get those attestations forms. 2 of them, my understanding, is a miscommunication. They never received the email where they needed to fill out a self-attestation form, and I expect those to be filled out by today. Also, a small update on the exemptions. We've only had 1% of our employees file for exemptions. That's 6 of them. Only out of those 6, only 1 of those is subject to the mandatory mandate through CDPH. Out of those 6, 5 of those are religious, 1 is medical, and we're working with those individuals to gather more information to continue the accommodation process based on the information that they submitted. Opening it up for any questions or comments.
Thanks, Edgar, for working on that, getting that to the board.
Any questions from the board members regarding this presentation?
No, I just want to thank Edgar for pulling that together. That's very helpful.
It
Thank
was
you.
a team effort. I say a lot of thanks to County Council. They've been working with us, Health and Human Services, the entire CAO team, putting this together. It's a team approach.
As well as all the employees too, for going through the process and testing.
Yeah, and it's great to see that the vast majority of our county employees are vaccinated. Thank you.
Okay. So then on that point, if there aren't any further questions, let's go ahead and go to public comment then on any of the presentation for item number 3.
If you'd like to make a comment in chambers, please provide a speaker card. On Zoom, press *9 on your phone or the raise your hand icon on your screen. We have Robert Bernoski in chambers.
It is so hard for me to be polite. How dare you condemn anyone involved with this? And yes, I am the husband of the superintendent, the same person that shares a house, shares a bed with that superintendent. And when she's down there doing CPR with her fellow administrators that close to that student that was hurt, I think I have a right to know what the student's condition is. Furthermore, as somebody who went to science camp, I think I have a right to know whether the student was one of the students that had an outbreak there. I'm not going to break the student confidentiality, but I heard an outright lie stated here for the world to say. So your Texas doctor, who I should have a lot of respect for, he better have his facts right, because I don't think that they are. But folks, just think about what you did. You issued a press release to get the alarm going. The doctor had to walk it back on TV, but that wasn't good enough. You still have to be at war with Rob Bernoski, I guess, or war with the public. So you go on Telemundo, and I guess it was Telemundo I saw, and you make, again, factually incorrect statements. I reached out to my supervisor. I reached out to another supervisor. I tried to reach out to the administration, but no, you want to ignore it because it doesn't fit some narrative. Folks, do your job. Let's keep the decorum. Yes, I am the husband of Jenny Bernoski, proud of it. I will never shy away from that. And yes, when I know facts that might help you guys manage the county and manage the situation, I'm going to relay those to you. I didn't break any confidentialities. I wasn't telling any secrets. I wanted to help solve the problem. So I'm Rob Bernowski. I'm pro-vax. I'm my body, my choice. Make the choice to get vaccinated. I'm not some nut job that's trying to go against you. I'm trying to help my community. You folks serve us. Allow constituents to talk to you. Do not degrade them just because they're a member of the public that happens to be married
Thank
to the
you.
most significant person in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alia Salinas?
Thank you, Madam Chair and supervisors. Excuse me. I can understand Rob's emotions right now, but at the same time, what's more concerning to me is that it's this child's condition has been politicized, and Supervisor Hernandez claimed that he had a conversation that he wants to work with the board. Yet he's the one who's being divisive. This is what started. I put the branch out, an olive branch out in January of 2020, because I was really, really critical of Hernandez's lack of understanding and lack of trying to get himself educated on the subjects that were coming up here on the agenda. Now, for him to come out here and the first thing he does is he claims he's not a doctor. That's correct. He's not a doctor. He questions the doctor corrects him, and yet he turns around and he's like, well, I still don't believe it. Well, that's the problem with Supervisor Hernandez with this issue this year. In 2020, no one expected this to happen in the entire